Maintaining global stratification. Neocolonialism also refers to the dominance of the most industrialized nations over the least industrialized nations. This theory believes that this dominance is maintained through international organizations such as the United Nations, World Bank, and International Monetary Fund. This means that the poorer nations will always be in debt to the wealthier nations. Those who lend money tend to have more power than those who borrow. This relationship can also be seen in the sale of military weapons. Poor countries purchase millions of dollars of military hardware from the wealthier nations, and then end up with huge repayment plans, as well as outside influence in their affairs. Under neocolonialism, there is less of a need for military control. Influence is maintained more from indirect political control and economic exploitation. It should be mentioned that neocolonialist nations still keep large militaries for occasions when political and economic control is not enough to maintain their advantage. Multinational corporations play an important role in keeping poor nations poor. The influence of multinational corporations is not limited to national boundaries. Some multinational corporations are so large that they have larger gross domestic products than the countries they do business in. These companies try to manufacture their products where labor costs are the lowest. Many people believe that large multinational corporations, such as Nike, take advantage and exploit the cheap overseas labor market. Multinational corporations have so much power and money that they can influence the government of the host nation. An example of this is how AT&T influenced our government to intervene in the affairs of Chile in 1973 with the overthrow of Allende from the position of President of Chile. Let's wrap up by reviewing some global issues related to stratification and inequality. To wrap up, we'll talk about 3 different global issues: income, health, and education. All of these will be explored in greater detail in the second half of our course, but we should at least review them in the context of stratification. With respect to income, there's a huge disparity between countries. The World Bank defines poverty in 2 different ways. The first is extreme poverty. This category refers to people who live on an income of $1.25 per day. The World Bank estimates that in the year 2010, roughly 1.2 billion people were living in extreme poverty. People in this category cannot meet basic needs for survival. There is little or no access to education, healthcare, safe drinking water, or sanitation. Most people in this category live in a rudimentary shelter with few possessions and are chronically hungry. A country as a whole is deemed to suffer from extreme poverty if the proportion of the population in extreme is at least 25% of the total population. Relative poverty is defined as a household income level below a given proportion of average national income. Most of the poor in developed countries like the U.S. fall into this category. These people are poor relative to the high income earners in their society. They have enough income to meet their daily needs and perhaps a little extra for a few goods or services, but they still do not have access to quality health care, education, or other cultural goods that would allow them upward social mobility. That's all we'll say about income for now. Health issues. There are a number of health issues that affect a person's life. Life expectancy rates and mortality rates are the most important. Health outcomes in more developed countries are much better, especially for the wealthy, as compared to those who live in the less developed countries. For women giving birth to a child, it's always been a risky affair. It's been especially more so in less developed countries. The high number of maternal deaths in some areas of the world reflects inequalities in access to health services and highlights the gap between the rich and the poor. Research from the World Health Organization shows that almost all maternal deaths occur in developing countries. The maternal mortality ratio in developing countries in 2015 is 239 per 100,000 live births versus 12 per 100,000 live births in developed countries. There are large disparities between countries, but also within countries, and between women with high and low income and those women living in rural versus urban areas. Let's move on to infant mortality rates. According to the World Health Organization, in 2015, 75% of all under 5 deaths, that is under the age of 5, occurred within the first year of life. Globally, the infant mortality rate has decreased from an estimated rate of 63 deaths per 1,000 live births in 1990 to 32 deaths per 1,000 live births in 2015. The infant mortality rates are much higher in less developed countries compared to the more developed countries. Too many mothers in the poor countries experience the loss of a child. According to a World Health Organization report in 2013, life expectancy at birth for both sexes globally was 71 years, ranging from 62 years in low-income countries to 79 years in high-income countries. Women live longer than men all around the world. The gap in life expectancy between the sexes was 5 years in 1990 and had remained the same by 2013. The gap is much larger in high-income countries, more than 6 years, than in low-income countries, where it is around 3 years. Life expectancy at age 60 reflects the overall mortality level of a population over 60 years old. In 2013, the global population aged 60 years can expect to live another 20 on average, 2 years longer than in 1990. Life expectancy at age 60 in high-income countries is 6 years longer than that in low-income and lower middle-income countries. Finally, let's discuss fertility rates as it relates to health issues. More developed countries have lower fertility rates than the less developed countries. This makes it more difficult for the poorer countries to become more productive and hence wealthier. Modern research shows that a more developed country such as Singapore has a fertility rate of 0.079 children per mother, whereas a less developed country such as Nigeria has a fertility rate of 7.03 children per mother. Finally, education issues. One way that countries have used to get out of poverty has been to increase the education of its citizens. An increase in educational attainment has been a critical factor in helping poor countries to become wealthier. It has also been especially important to educate the female members of society. Of the 774 million adults aged 15 years and older who still cannot read or write, 2/3 of them are women.